The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It is Thursday, June the 5th, 2025. We're live here with Financial Rebellion, and I'm here with Carolyn Betts. We do not have Catherine, sadly, today, but we do have the most amazing guest. We have Dr. Sherri Tenpenny with us this morning, and she is a doctor, I must say, that's most experienced, in my opinion. She's been in our movement for so long, done so much research, and there's no one better. So good morning, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, and thank you so much for being here.
Good morning, Polly. Good morning, Carolyn. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're super excited because you have a new book out, and we're going to pull that up on the screen right now for people to see. Zero Accountability in a Failed System. And I haven't read this book, so I'm going to be ordering it as soon as this show is over. But I did do a bit of research on it, and it looks fascinating. Tell us, Dr. Tenpenny, what this book is about.
Well, it's a compendium of 25 years of my work that I've been doing in this vaccine industry. It started with comparing, I wrote a book in 2005 called Fowl, Bird Flu, It's Not What You Think, spelled Fowl. It was about bird flu, and it was written in real time, and it was really about the environmental, it was an environmental book, that dioxin was causing a 100-fold increase of virulence of garden variety influenza viruses. And so when bird flu came back around in summer of 23, I was looking at my book from 2005, and I said, which is not in print right now. And I said, there's a lot of good material in here, but you know what? There's a lot that has happened in the last 20 years. And I've been with it. I've been involved in vaccine education for 25 years. So I said, let's just go through and see where we are. So it started from there. And then I talked about past pandemics, H5N1, about H1N1 that came in, I think, 2009 or 11, the swine flu fiasco, which was really, really important. And because when you compare it to the COVID vaccines or the COVID jabs, we can't call them vaccines because they're not, the COVID jabs, when they came out with the swine flu pandemic that they wanted to vaccinate every single person in the United States in 1976. When they rolled it out, they had 50 deaths and about 150 cases of Guillain-Barré, and within 6 weeks they stopped it. Now compare that to the COVID catastrophe that we've had with the COVID jab, that we now have over 1.6 million VAERS reports. There have been estimates of more than 20 million people in America alone that are dead from the COVID jab, or at least injured. Early on, about 2 years ago, I saw a report from the expose that they estimated that about 2.1 billion people worldwide had been injured from the COVID jab. But yet, we're not only still pushing mRNA vaccines, we are approving new ones. So I talk about that. I talk about the scam of Tamiflu. There's a topic talking about what comes through that needle, and I take a really deep dive into a lot of the ingredients, like the aborted fetal tissues and the animal cells, and how we make vaccines from tumor cells, from actual animal tumor cells, and that ends up in the vaccine. I talk about various different adjuvants that they use, from aluminum to MF59 to GlaxoSmithKline's ASO3 1234 system, which is really awful. So I go into a lot of details about the adjuvants. And then the core of the book is actually chapter 14, 15, and 16, how public health became weaponized. And it started with electronic medical records and how they co-opted people in through Medicare, and what really happened when Medicare got instituted. And so how that became weaponized. And really the weaponization of public health started in 1798 with the development of the Marine Health Service called MHS, the Marine Health Service, which, because at that time we were still colonies and there was so much of the commerce that was coming in around the coastlines, and they were transporting a lot of typhoid, cholera, and yellow fever in through all of the ships that were coming in worldwide. And so the Public Health Service started then, and actually there was a tax on sailors that started in 1798. It was 10 cents a month. That was the first form of public health insurance that actually started in this country. So if any of you people have been following me a long time, they know that I really like history. And I like to start from, where did we come from? How did we get into this mess? How did we get here? Well, with the weaponization of the Public Health Service, it started way back then. So I track very important laws and policies and things that have happened. And that's things in our community, Polly, that from a health freedom movement, we don't really talk about that very much. And I talk about the 40-year march to 2030 and the institution of the Healthy People programs that started in 1998. And we don't talk about that very much in our communities either. But it's really, really important, because it started out with 6 or 7 very simple things that the Surgeon General at the time thought that in a 10-year period of time, Americans could accomplish, like stop smoking, more exercise, wear seat belts, wear a helmet when you're out on a motorcycle. And now it has progressed. Oh, every 10 years, they create new ones. And I go through and walk that through. I create little tables so people can see. And now there's over 42 different goals and 1,200 different points that they evaluate and put into the database, because we know that healthcare data is the new gold. And then there's a chapter called Sacrifice for the Greater Good that I talk about the VAERS program, how that got started. And I talk about the Covered Countermeasure Injury Compensation Program that came out of the PrEP Act that started in 2005, that's never been funded, doesn't have a table, has thrown all of the injured parties from the COVID-19 vaccines, COVID-19 jabs, has thrown them underneath the bus for lots of reasons. And that's really the core of the book that really got me going, was really investigating the CICP and how horrible it is. And I talk a lot about quarantines and how quarantine actually started in the 1600s and what it's become in terms of a surveillance program, and the international vaccination schedule and the international vaccine programs of how we're all tied in together internationally and nationally. And then the best part of the book, Polly, the last chapter is chapter 19, that after I lay out all of this egregious, horrible stuff that's been going on for the last 40 or 50 years in recent memory, there's a chapter called Tying It All Together, the Activist Playbook. So I kind of encourage people to get involved at some level, and to, we got the government we deserve. We got COVID because it started in 2005 and nobody paid attention. And suddenly we had this again in 2020. And, we have to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that people will say, fool me once, shame on you, bad person, bad government, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, that just isn't going to happen. Now that I'm loaded with bear and I understand the last 20 years of history and the medical industry and how we got here, we're not going to let this happen again. We have to create something new.
Well, it sounds absolutely fascinating. It sounds also like a book that every teen homeschooler should be looking at, sort of the history of that. I think now let's go to Carolyn Betts. I know she's got questions for you of the term of the day, and that'll lead into the questions that she has for you on the book.
Yes, the term for the day is the electronic health records, which, according to the book and the truth, is something that came into effect I think under Obamacare, but there were incentives for medical practices to use systems that were very expensive, and there were financial incentives for them to do that, to enter virtually all health information that they gather in this huge database. And I'm interested in who can get to it, but there are different aspects. If you go and get a checkup, which in Medicare is not really a checkup. They ask you a whole lot of questions. They weigh you, they, want to do a blood test, all sorts of data points. And I think there were 18 data points that they're supposed to be collecting. And I think that's, Sherri can correct me if I'm wrong, but the doctors basically have a protocol of when you go to the doctor, they're supposed to be collecting this information and putting it in with these international codes that come out of the World Health Organization. Is that a good summary of what's going on, Sherri?
Well, kind of, and that's where I talked about with the Healthy People 2020 and the weaponization of Medicare. When Medicare was instituted in the U.S. In 1963, the Congress said, well, we've got all of these veterans that are aging that came out of World War II. We should take care of them because at the time, life expectancy for men was about 67, and for women, it was about 70 or 71. So, Congress said, well, we can take care of these old people for a couple of years. It's not going to be that big of a deal. By 1995, the system was pretty much broken because life expectancy has gone forward. And so all of the stuff inside of Medicare and Medicare being tied to Social Security, that came out of the Clinton era. And they really need to unbundle that because people are living much older now. And like I said, the life expectancy then was 67 for men and about 70 or 71 for women. And now we've got people that very healthily, and they're still gainfully employed, working through their 60s, 70s, and sometimes into their 80s. And Senator Chuck Grassley is 93 years old. And so people can live a lot longer and work a lot longer. And that's what really causes a real big problem for the system. And so that was one of the first steps of weaponization. One of the other ones is the electronic medical records, and once the electronic medical records started, and your data can be accessed by a couple million people. It's not HIPAA does not protect you in privacy whatsoever. It just blinds the data, but it really your information can still be accessed. And this Healthy People Initiative, I just checked in my book in 2010 to 2020. Named Healthy People 2020, they had 42 focus areas and more than 1,200 objectives. And those are some of the objectives that they are now wanting to talk to your teenagers alone in the room, that they don't want the teenagers in the room. So they ask you things like, are you safe? Has anybody ever tried to harm you? Do you have guns in the house? All these different, do your parents fight? All of these different things are all of what they call the social society, the social networking questions that they are really collecting data on us.
And that's going into the electronic health records, oh gosh.
Social determinants of health is what they call them.
SDOH.
Yeah. And those are all, again, people, they comb them all out and they crunch them around and they decide, where to put more money, where to do less money, maybe this person's at risk or this community's at risk. And so public health has become absolutely weaponized. And, public health is so much more than high vaccination rates and low infection rates. And so the social determinants of health came out of about the 1970s or 80s when they started to see that people people in various social economic areas have different levels of health. So we better evaluate that. And so it's just another way that they it's like the camel that sneaks in and puts his nose underneath the tent. It's just another way for the government to mess with your life and to look at us as nothing more than a widget that they can monetize.
Right. And you make very clear in the book about, you're an osteopath, and in osteopathy and, chiropractic and so-called alternative health systems, there's an emphasis on finding out what's really wrong with you and causing symptoms and working with those symptoms. And under the sort of AMA model, allopathic model, we're talking about giving people chemicals in response. And even further than just giving medicines, we're talking about an emphasis on vaccines. And if you follow the money in public health and international health through the WHO, a huge percentage of the money is going toward vaccine related things rather than preventing or addressing the actual health conditions.
Well, vaccines are the economic driver of the entire system. I mean, think
Right.
about, from the most invaluable commodity in the country is a newborn child. Because if they can start with with four vaccines, sometimes five vaccines given to pregnant women now, and three more vaccines given immediately after birth, and seven vaccines given at 2, 4 each at 2, 4, and 6 months, children now get 28 jabs by the time they're 1 year of age. They have become a customer for life before they've eaten their first food color additive Cheerio, really is. So so everything that's happening in the government in terms of changing our health and cleaning up our food and getting rid of dyes and petroleums, all that stuff, it's so important. It's really, really important. The stuff should have never been there in the first place. And a lot of that came out of the 1920s. And there's actually a couple of good books about that were written in the 1920s, explained how they started to put preservatives and additives into our food. But the big elephant in the room, and I actually wrote a Substack about that, is we could suddenly the entire planet, or let me rephrase that, the entire United States could be dropped into the Garden of Eden, and we could eat the most pristine food that God ever created for us. Clean water, clean air, fresh food, uncontaminated animals, uncontaminated soil, and we could have the best food, most pristine food ever. But if we don't address the elephant in the room, the 28 jabs that kids get by the time they're 1 year of age, and then they get another 10 by the time they are 10 or more by the time they start kindergarten, they're getting annual flu shots. If they get multi-dose flu shots, they're getting doses of mercury every single time that they are getting a jab. If we don't address that schedule, then no matter what effort that we put into cleaning up our food, it's going to be, in my opinion, kind of irrelevant because we've poisoned children 28 times before they start eating meals.
Right. And before the show, we were talking about the whole placebo issue and the collection of data. In order to know whether the vaccines are doing any good, you need to compare people who've been vaccinated with people who've not been vaccinated and collect data on it. But if you don't have any people who are not vaccinated, which is the reason that we want everybody to be vaccinated starting at day one, because then you have no clean person to compare the vaccinated people to, then there are clinical trials, and they say that they're comparing vaccinated to people who have a placebo, but they're playing games with the whole term placebo also. Can you tell us about that? I found that fascinating.
Yeah, they really are playing games. That's sort of like how they co-opted the word vaccine and stuck it on the COVID-19 bioweapon jab. They co-opted the word vaccine. Well, now they've changed the word placebo. I think, and part of it is they know that those of us like you and Polly and Catherine and a whole bunch of people are wise to the fact of looking at studies and trying to find the placebo, which is very difficult. It's very difficult search to go through all kinds of, clinicaltrials.gov, PubMed, all these publications to try to find what they used as the placebo in a clinical trial. And so back in 2013, the World Health Organization decided that that when you have a control group, so you've got, let's say you have 100 people, 50 people are going to get the new jab, and 100 people should get the placebo. And by our standards and by real double-blind placebo-controlled standards, that should be an injection of saline or something extremely inert. Well, the World Health Organization said, well, that's really not fair to those 50 people in that clinical trial because they are not being able to get a vaccine of known benefit that has already been determined to be safe and effective and put on pediatric schedules. So they changed the rules to say that in clinical trials, if there is an existing vaccine that's already been said to be safe and effective by the FDA and by the European equivalent of the FDA in your I think it's the EU something, the European something in Europe. If there's an existing vaccine, you have to use that as the placebo, which they no longer call a placebo, they call it a comparator. So, for example, to make that really clear, if you were bringing a brand new hepatitis B vaccine to market, and that 50 people are going to get the experimental vaccine, and the other 50 people are going to get the placebo. Well, instead of using a shot of saline, you're going to get an existing hepatitis B vaccine to compare the side effects to. That's why they now call it a comparator. So now we're testing a vaccine against a vaccine to tell whether or not it's safe for general use. And my big concern about that, and I wrote a whole Substack about that to explain it and give links to that article that I saw on your screen, because it's from 2013. It's really important. And I said, when placebos are not inert, when they're used another placebo to compare, it's a really big deal. And my big concern is that eventually, because even though we are working diligently, and there's huge groups of us that are pushing to eliminate the mRNA vaccines and not allow the saRNA vaccines to get onto the market. My concern is that the pharmaceutical industry, they don't care what we think, and they're just going to roll forward with these shots. And that eventually there's been some talk about going back and looking at the vaccines, the 16 vaccines that are already been approved and on the pediatric schedule. And we all know, I mean, Secretary Kennedy has said, Aaron Series said, Del Bigtree said, I've said, you've said, everybody said, there's never really been true placebo-controlled trials. So my concern is if they're going to go back and try to use the existing vaccines like hepatitis A, B, Prevnar, polio, MMR, etc., as the comparator to the new mRNA vaccine that they want to bring to the market. And when they use the mRNA vaccine in their clinical trial, say mRNA for MMR, and they find that it has the same side effects as the comparator, the existing MMR, they'll say, well, it's equal, they're equal, we can just switch them out. So it's,
Right.
Can I just ask you a question a second?
Yeah.
There's a lot of confusion and slight panic in our movement right now, especially, with our viewers and the people who support Children's Health Defence. This mRNA thing is not, we've got this new administration, which is pretty much full of our people in places, and we're not seeing the results that we want to already. Can you talk about what you think? I mean, this is your opinion and not necessarily views of Children's Health Defence, but let's talk about this for a second, because some of the news coming out from HHS is actually disturbing.
Very disturbing. It's very disturbing that they have approved a new mRNA vaccine. They've approved it. I saw the letter, from FDA that says it's been approved. We didn't send it over for examination on your clinical trials because it's got the same safety profile as the comparator. So you can just go ahead and start marketing it, start using it now. And then after the fact, we're going to do clinical trials to see if it's safe. That doesn't happen. You can't. So what you're doing is experimenting on the general population to find out that whether or not the new mRNA vaccine that they just approved is safe, which none of them are. There's a stack of studies. I mean, Peter McCullough, when he did his presentation, I was there. I was at the hearing last week. Senator Johnson had another hearing on the mRNA vaccines, and Peter presented a paper that had over 1,000 references. And he said, this is only part of them. All the studies that have already shown that the mRNA technology failed. It doesn't work. We tried it. We maimed and killed millions of people. Stop. We don't need any more studies to see whether or not it's safe, as Director Makary says. That, well, we need to look at the science. No, yes, here's the body of science. Stop it. We don't need any more.
Look at the VAERS reports.
Yes, well, and 1.6 million people filed a VAERS report on injuries from a COVID shot, which is a travesty, and that's one of the things I talk about in detail in the book. Because you filing a VAERS report for a covered countermeasure, which is what the COVID-19 jab is. VAERS doesn't cover covered countermeasures. So people should have been filing a report with the CICP program.
Right.
And when they didn't do that, the statute of limitations is 1 year. There's no defined table. There's no funding from Congress. So the 40 people that did get compensated through the CIC program, 40, that's it. 2 people got fairly sizable compensation awards. One got 1.1 million for a blood disorder, and one person got for myocarditis. Now, if you take those 40 people and you take those 2 high payments out as outliers, and you average the remaining 38, on average, those severely injured people got about $4,000. And there's been no one that has been compensated for a death. It's horrible. It's just absolutely horrifying. And I go into great detail about that in the book, in the chapter called Sacrifice for the Greater Good.
I love your Substack, the one that says gene therapy is genetic. That one. By the way, everybody listening, if you're not signed up to Sherri's Substack, you need to be. It's like breaking news. It's really good. But you talk about, and this is really interesting, I never thought about this. You talk about how we call it, don't call it a vaccine, call it, gene therapy, which in the therapy part suggests it's a benefit. Talk about that, because I thought that was really interesting. You bang on.
Well, from the very beginning, from 2020, when they started talking about the COVID-19 jabs as being a gene therapy, that was kind of like nails on the chalkboard to me, when it just kind of grated on me, because therapy is something that's generally beneficial, like speech therapy or art therapy or occupational therapy or physical therapy. These are all doing good things and moving things beneficial. It's like, why are they calling this destructive, damaging thing that goes in and reorganizes your DNA a therapy? So I said, I'm going to look into that. And so my entire Substack is about that. That goes back into like the the late 1800s, when they were looking at some genetic modification of plants, and, the yellow and blue make green plants. I mean, things like that. They started having international conferences, and then they started talking about genetic modification of human genes. And then they were talking about the genetic modification of humans. And that just really rubbed people the wrong way, because it just reeked of eugenics. And so they changed the name from a genetic modification of humans to gene therapy, because it sounded nicer and it was more easy to get people to accept that. So it's one of those flip-on words that they've done to make it sound like it's a good thing. And then the other thing that I wrote a lot about in the Substack was the regulation of this thing called a gene therapy, because it's not really a vaccine. They don't really want to call it a bioweapon. It does do some therapeutic things, but so in both in the US and in Europe, it's very difficult to regulate and even to know what classification to put it into. So I took a pretty deep dive in that Substack, and the Substack is just drtenpenny.substack.com. It comes out every Saturday. It's free. Just sign up, because the more you sign up, the more that they promote it for us, and it's free. And I also do a Substack on Sunday called tenpennywalkwithgod.substack.com, and that's free too. It's kind of my spiritual give back that I do on Sunday. And so those, and then we post something every day on our Substack on drtenpenny.substack.com. Just a short little quip, a clip on Monday, Thursdays, Throwback Thursdays, and Fridays, Fastback Fridays, and Wednesday is Wellness Wednesday, Tuesday is Testimonial Tuesday, and Monday is the Monday Minute. And so they're really short, just little clips. And so people really like those. They've been really popular. And we post a podcast every day at 11 a.m. too. So we're busy.
I see you on X as well. So yeah. You're definitely there as well. Did you want to say something, Carolyn? Sorry.
Yeah, on the issue of what's in the countermeasures, which, and being an attorney, I'm really big on using that term, because that is what the shot is as a legal matter. It's a countermeasure, and the legislation that was enacted to create the whole concept of a countermeasure was intended at the time to counter bioweapons coming from outside the United States, and that was the whole purpose of it. And now we've got this whole regime of covered countermeasures that have the limitation on liability under the PrEP Act, which is evil, evil, evil. But we don't really know we know, I guess, what's been represented to the FDA as being in the shots, but a lot of people have come out and attempted to do testing, and there's a real question as to what's really in them and whether there are things like Internet of Bodies nanobots in them. Have you looked into that at all?
Yeah, and so that's in there, plus all of the plasmid DNA that's in there that really is disruptive. They've also, believe it or not, they actually have found traces of this army worm technology that they use to make a flu block. And there's traces of the protein from the Swiss Army worm in there, and all of the lipid nanoparticle technology that binds the shot to the cell and allows the delivery of the mRNA and the DNA plasmids into the cell is just dastardly. And the countermeasure was meant to be a military term. Like you said, we were trying to protect against this. But the covered countermeasure injury program, it's like, because it's covered under an EUA, anything that was used during COVID, whether it was remdesivir, whether it was a nasal swab, whether it was a monoclonal antibody, all of those things are considered covered countermeasures under the program, and you can't sue over them. They're all protected by the PrEP Act. And that's, the PrEP Act extension, Bexera, one of the last things he did before he left office, there had been, I believe, 14 amendments to the PrEP Act, and I talk about that in the book. He extended the coverage for the emergency use authorization and the emergency for COVID through 2029. There's no emergency. That could be deleted by a stroke of a pen tomorrow. And when that covered countermeasure protection is over, then that could open the liability gates for all of these people that have been injured and killed, all the parents that have lost their children, all of the women who've had miscarriages because of the COVID jabs. That is a becoming a thinner and thinner protection. And I think it was Iowa. You may correct me if I'm wrong, but they have figured out a way to be able to sue Pfizer and Moderna and J&J, et cetera, around the PrEP Act, having to do with fraud and not having to do with vaccine injury, but having to do with the fraud and the fraudulent way that they promoted the EUA. And so
Right.
there's some cracks in the armor that are starting to fall apart, but that entire thing just needs to go away. Just needs to go away. That PrEP Act just needs to go away.
Right. And I think a lot of people, I think people who follow Children's Health Defense understand what the PrEP Act is. But other people think somehow that if there were an intention to kill you, or a knowledge that it was dangerous, that you would be able to sue the government or the manufacturers or the doctors or somebody for injuring you. And the fact is that the PrEP Act is so stringent in the definition of willful misconduct, for example. It's different from the standard in any other kind of injury suit that you might have. And it's basically impossible to prove the damage that you could actually recover from. But can you explain how the PrEP Act, this was fascinating in the book, how the PrEP Act came into being as part of an Appropriations Act? And you got to watch. I just want to say, you got to watch those Appropriations Act. They bury all sorts of things in them, and they're doing it right now.
It was a defense appropriation bill that the committee members had signed off on and had gone home because it got passed. I believe it was December 17th. It was right before the Christmas break. And at 11:30 at night, Senator Bill Frist and Senator Richard Byrne from North Carolina came into the House side of the appropriation bill and tacked on an amendment called Division E that nobody had read. They called it Division E, And that inside of there was the specifics about the PrEP Act and how specifically designed so that in the future, if people were injured by a covered countermeasure, they would not be able to get compensation. There would be no of government funding. There would be nothing like that that they did even when inside of the kind of lame VAERS and the vaccine court, but it's the best we have, and at least it's something. And so, but they just tacked it on. And then I pulled out an entire section from the congressional record when Senator Obey from Wisconsin he was the head of the Defense Appropriation Committee, and he was just absolutely appalled because nobody had read it at that point in time, even though they read it later and they all signed on it. There was a whole page of signatures that they signed on it later. But the way that they did it, they just tacked it on as an amendment. None of the rest of the Congress had seen it. It had never been voted on, it had never been debated, never been discussed. It just came into being. And then Senator Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, had tried twice to either modify it or to repeal it because he was one of the early people that said, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Anybody that gets injured or killed from a vaccine in the future that is developed, is called a covered countermeasure, there's no recourse for those people, and we really need to change that. And he tried twice, and he said it was the worst. He said, winners and losers are often, and I quote this in the book, and winners and losers are often chosen around here with the pharmaceutical industry by how much they gain. He said, I've never, in all my years in the Senate, I've never seen anything like it. And they really tried to change it, modify it, to at least get funding for these injured parties. But unfortunately, Senator Kennedy passed away before he could move that forward, and nobody else has picked up the baton.
Right. Now, let's be very clear. In order to end the emergency, which is the excuse for, or the reason under the law that the manufacturers and others can get liability protection and not be suable. The Secretary of HHS, who is now Bobby Kennedy, can retract that emergency finding. Is that not correct?
That is correct. That's definitely correct. And so the Secretary of HHS, with a swipe of his pen, could go in and say, there is no further emergency. We're ending this EUA and level of protection. We can just make that stop tomorrow.
But yeah, he's not doing it.
What's that?
But yet he hasn't done that.
He hasn't done it so far.
Okay.
And, so I think it's really interesting. It's really important too.
I have a question for you. So talking about HHS again, recently, Bobby Macquarie and I can't remember. Anyway, they stood up and said that the COVID shots now are not recommended for pregnant women that are healthy and healthy children. And so we already, by the way, have had an email coming into Children's Health Defence where a mother took in her child or children who have diabetes and various other things. And the pediatrician was like, you have to get this shot because now all immunocompromised children have to get it. But correct me if I'm wrong, having gone through these inserts before in my life, it says on the inserts of a lot of these, do not give to immunocompromised children or people. It's a mess. What is going on? Because we know that the worst kind of people to take any kind of shot are those that have underlying conditions. We know that. I mean, that's what happened to my son. He was on Tylenol and goodness knows what, ear infections, gave him the MMR, and the rest is history. He's gone. So I find it greatly disturbing, greatly disturbing. I'm struggling to hold back my tongue. And when everybody says, be patient, let him do his job, it's a problem for me.
Well, and rightfully so, Polly. And it's and I've heard stories and arguments on both sides. Just that more things have moved forward in the first 105 days since Secretary Kennedy's been confirmed than in the last 40 years, and it takes time to turn around the Titanic and all of these different things. And it is, I can't even imagine the level of landmines that are inside of HHS, just trying to figure out the people that are holdovers that are still there. Are they friend or foe? And are they undermining you at every level? And I feel like Bobby's swimming in a pond with a bunch of rabid alligators, and he barely has a stick to defend himself by the things that are happening. On the other hand, you know, so it's sort of like, well, he's walking sort of a tight rope, but on the other hand, this is something he needs to take boldly on. And I believe that a lot of people, like people, it's all the followers of CHD, all the previous supporters when Bobby was running for president, when all of the parents of vaccine injured children, all of the country put him up there to stop this nonsense. And I really believe we were just talking about this yesterday in a group chat that I'm in. If we can still get people to write letters, make phone calls, show there is a huge groundswell to get rid of this technology, that I think that that would help him to be able to go into Trump and say, listen, your supporters really don't like this. They don't want it. And he can go to all of those rabid senators and representatives and say, your people don't want this. Do you ever bother talking to them? They voted for you. And, you know, kind of do it from that perspective. Now, this is just me sitting out here in Ohio in my chair, and it might, you know, if Bobby was sitting here talking to me, he'd say, "Yeah, that sounds reasonable, Sherri, but it's impossible to do it that way." I don't know. I'm not there. I'm not privy to conversations. I don't know what it is, but I do know that this is a failed technology. I went out to Chat GPT last night, Polly, and I said, give me a list of 10 failed technologies that they thought that were going to be really incredibly great, and they turned out to be a complete bust, and they pulled them off the market. And there were like 10 things. Several of them were electronic. One was the Etzel Ford. One was a hovercraft sort of thing that just didn't work and started on fire. A lot of lawsuits and things like that. So they immediately pulled it off the market. That's the way we should be positioning these mRNA. And then the mRNA vaccines that are already on the market, and I've heard there are 500 in the pipeline for animals, for plants, for fish, for bees, for everything that they want this technology in. It's a failed technology. They tried it, it didn't work, and they should never advance to the saRNA shots, ever, 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 ever.
I love the vaccine lessons for senators. Pull that up again, Lou, because you call out Dr. Senator Cassidy in that for being wrong, and that's what we should be doing, and you factually do it. Can you talk about that? Because that man is, I struggle with him.
That was so nicely said, Polly. Struggle with him? I'd like to strangle him. He's, you know, he's awful. He's one of the worst senators up there. And, you know, because he hides behind the fact that he's a physician, he thinks he knows something about vaccines for which he knows nothing. And he obviously said, in fact, I pulled that out, that little clip that he said, you know, when Secretary Kennedy said there's been no placebo-controlled studies, he said, yes, there have been for rotavirus, Gardasil, and what was the other one? Rotavirus.
Polio?
No, it wasn't polio. Rotavirus, Gardasil, and MMR. And so I pulled that clip out and I put it inside my Substack. I had my team take that video and just pull out that 7 seconds of when he was talking in there.
Oh,
And
Lou's got that clip. Do you want to quickly play it? Lou's got it.
sure, absolutely.
Carry on, yeah.
Yeah.
But the secretary made the statement that no vaccines except for COVID have been evaluated against placebo. For the record, that's not true. Rotavirus, measles, and HPV vaccines have been, and some vaccines are tested against previous versions. So just for the record, to set that straight. Next, Senator Hassan.
Well, and see there, he just said, and some were tested against previous vaccines, which is what we just talked about 5 minutes ago, about the, you know, hepatitis B compared against hepatitis B, et cetera. So, and so I went through and I said, no, wait a minute. So I dug out, and it took a really long time to find, because it's not easy to find what these placebos are. And I showed that there's no stated placebo for the measles vaccine ever, all the way back to the 1960s when it was released in 1963. For the Rotarix vaccine, it says clearly that they use the Rotarix vaccine, and the placebo is the Rotarix vaccine minus the virus. And the same thing is true for Rotatech. And then the Gardasil vaccine, they use a shot of aluminum. So, Senator Kennedy, you were wrong. And here's the proof.
So, and that is what we should be doing, right? Calling out. It drove me insane at the last Senator Johnson's hearing on COVID, when they were supposed to be talking about COVID, and then they put that big placard up with measles deaths, 3 measles deaths, which we know now that 2 of those definitely 100% did not die of measles. But we've got to keep calling them out. We can't let them get away with it. What else, Dr. Tenpenny, can we be doing rather than sitting back going, Bobby's in, so everything's going to be sorted. We can see that's not clearly happening. So what can we be doing, the people?
Well, I do think that one of the things we absolutely need to do is keep supporting Bobby in his role, because we don't know, we're not privy to all the conversations. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I would like to, support Bobby and go after Makari, actually, because he's the head of the FDA. He doesn't have to approve any of those things. He can stop getting money from the pharmaceutical industry if he wants to. And just, really, and we don't have the head of a CDC, the head of a CDC, a new head of the CDC yet. We don't know anything that's going on over there. I think that Jay Bhattacharya is doing the best he can at the NIH. And it was interesting when he gave a little talk about, we really have to look at what happened here. And people got up and walked out. So disrespectful. And not wanting to rock the boat and not wanting to see anything new or any changes. So I think it's really important, and particularly since this is CHD, to continue to support Secretary Kennedy in his role of what he's doing. Give him a little bit of grace, but at the same time, respectfully keep the pressure on. Keep the pressure on. Make phone calls, send emails, send letters, keep the conversation going about how terrible this is. And Bobby, with a stroke of a pen, no matter how many guns are aimed at your head, you could stop this for the American people. So I think that there's a way to support the things that he's doing. Like I said, we're not there. We don't know the real politics. We just got from the cheap seats over here. We're making calls of plays on the game. The game, but we can respectfully kind of keep the pressure on, saying we worked really hard to get you there, a lot because of this vaccine schedule and all the of injuries, and we understand the politics, but most of us think that it's cool that we're taking red dye 40 out of the food. Yes, it should, but it doesn't make any difference if we don't address the mRNA vaccines, the saRNA vaccines, and this pediatric schedule. I mean, Polly, why are we still giving kids 5 polio vaccines when there has been no polio in the Western Hemisphere since 1991?
And any polio is vaccine-inspired polio too, isn't it?
Vaccine strain polio in very few war-torn poverty countries that don't have running water flush toilets. They don't have any sanitation. And, the polio virus 1, because there's 3 different polio viruses in the vaccine, polio virus 1 is extinct from the planet, but we still give it to our kids here in the United States. Why are we doing that? Why are we still doing that? Hepatitis B was always negligible from the very beginning. Why are we still giving kids 3 doses of hepatitis B vaccine? Why do we give kids hepatitis A vaccines, which was meant for a specialized population? Why are we across the board doing it? Why are we giving kids Gardasil vaccines when we know that, we give a 9 to 12-year-old girl or boy a Gardasil vaccine that has a made-up, fabricated endpoint, and that we know that if they're going to develop cervical cancer, of any problems, they're going to be in their 30s, 40s, or 50s, and the antibodies are going to be long gone by then. And that we know that there's ways that you can treat and address cervical health with iodine, with different types of supplements and herbs for cervical health. You don't need this. Why are we doing this? And, I've been doing this for 25 years, Polly. I've been trying to just lay it out to people to say, vaccines have never been proven to be safe. Being effective does not mean it protects you. They're not necessary. And every single dose of every single vaccine at some level in your body causes harm. And please ask what's coming through the needle. Know what you're being injected with. And would you inject that into your neighbor's cat, let alone into your precious little baby?
Yeah,
Sherri, I assume that you believe that one ought to be looking at the benefits of the vaccine, assuming that there are any, but whether it actually prevents something versus the downside of the damage from the vaccine, and to look and evaluate whether to do a vaccine based on whether the benefits outweigh the downside. And it seems like that's not part of the analysis at all. Everybody thinks that somehow, call it COVID, the thing they call COVID, is more dangerous than the vaccine. And I would think that the COVID is not as dangerous as the vaccine, and that my understanding is that it's virtually no danger to children, who are the ones that seem to be the population that they're aiming the countermeasure at.
There's no benefit to any vaccine. You know, the only one that I would say might have some benefit is if you've been bitten by a rabid animal. You know, the only episode that you have is the rabies vaccine as a therapeutic vaccine. But it's not so much about the risk or the benefit of the vaccine. It's if you get a vaccine versus do you get the infection. You know, you get the infection, it comes and goes in a week, and 10 days you got a lifetime
Right.
immunity for chicken pox and all these other things. That's another vaccine. It's been around since 1995. There's very little chicken pox in circulation anymore, but because of the mass vaccination of the chicken pox vaccine, we now have massive outbreaks of shingles, which was predicted in 1997 when it was first started. Oh, well, we have a solution for that. We'll create a shingles vaccine. And so that's the shingles vaccine. In fact, I just created a course on the shingles vaccine. It should be up any day now at learning4u.org, which is our educational site, learning the number 4you.org on the shingles shot, because we have created, it's the first vaccine now that we have that we are now using in response to using a vaccine. And, you know, with 500 vaccines in the pipeline, you know, when is it going to stop? When say, you know, if we can't stop the polio vaccine because there's been no polio vaccine, no polio in the Western Hemisphere, not just in the United States, in the Western Hemisphere, which means Canada, United States, Mexico, Central America, and South America, no polio, but we still give kids 4 to 5 polio vaccines.
I want to ask you about SIDS, because this is an issue that I'm passionate about. And we've done so many dead baby stories over the years, and they're getting more and more intense. What do you think causes sudden infant death syndrome? Because the parents that I'm speaking to tell me it's the vaccinations that have killed their babies.
We've known that since the 80s, Polly. And even before that, you know, when who was it that did all that research and called it cot death out of Australia? You know, wrote all those articles back, and, you know, that they actually tracked that all of these kids that died of SIDS were either right after their second, fourth, or 6-month round of shots. And there was Peter McCullough's Substack just came out just a couple days ago and was talking about that they felt that it was because the vaccines caused brain stem failure. And brain stem in your brain is at the bottom of your brain, and that's where a lot of your respiratory centers come out of. And so that the aluminum and the viruses and all the other chemicals and things that are in the injection go in and cause the brain stem damage, which then makes you stop breathing, which then makes you die.
And look, just on that subject, I just want to, without giving too much away, because I have to be careful what I say here. So in a recent case of death following vaccines, now the prosecuting lawyer, whatever you want to call these people, are saying, well, we know it's not the vaccines that killed the baby. We know it's not, because no baby can die 1 week after the vaccines. Please put that right, because we've known of babies that have died a week after. They've been it's a slow sickness that goes on, and then the baby just dies, and they're given lots of Tylenol and stuff like that, which doesn't help. But a baby can die following shots a week after their shots.
It was an artificial line in the sand set up by Donna Shalala back during, I think she was the HHS secretary under Clinton, where she absolutely gutted the vaccine injury table and saying all of these injuries have to happen within 72 hours or to be able to label them as being caused by the vaccine. No study, no anything, just here's a pencil, we're just going to draw a line in the sand. If it happened after 72 hours, then it didn't have anything to do with the vaccine. So that was a change and a modification done by a non-medical person to the vaccine injury compensation tables that are inside of theirs. And the FDA has just trotted happily along ever since and said that just because it says so on this table, because Donna Shalala said so, then if it's anything that falls outside of 72 hours, I think there's for the rubella vaccine, I think it's 42 days for development of severe debilitating arthritis. That's the longest one, is the rubella fraction of the MMR. It's like after 42 days, but all the rest of them are about 72 hours. If you didn't get anaphylaxis and die, if you didn't get SIDS and die, you didn't get seizure disorders and die within 72 hours of the vaccine, then it was caused by something else, an artificially set fabrication.
And the parents are then carted off to jail or whatever because they're accused of killing their child. It's so disturbing, these dead baby stories. I cannot tell you the whole thing, and all because we young mums trust our medical professionals. You guys have your medical degree. Why would we not trust you to have our children's best interest at heart? And what follows from that is catastrophic disaster and heartbreak.
100%. And you've seen it firsthand, Polly, with the Vax bus tours and the things that you did with, with all of those 3,000 and some stories that you heard. And then you did the whole movie on the vaccine, of the COVID vaccine injured families and things like that. It's just a disaster. And you've seen it and hear it and know it firsthand. And there's no refuting it.
No, we have to stop it. And I'm so grateful to you, Dr. Tenpenny, for all the work that you've done over the years and your amazing books and this new book, which I'm very excited to get. And I do hope our viewers will also get that as well. And remind everybody again how they can follow you in other ways.
If you go to drtenpenny.com, which is our main website, over at the far right-hand side, there's a little drop-down window that says social media, and you can click on that and you can see you have links to all of our different social media sites. I've got a really big following on X, which is at Busy Dr. T. And so from drtenpenny.com, social media is Busy Dr. T. Our membership site is shoptenpenny.net. If you want to join us and support us through our membership. And if you want to get the book, you can get it right now on Amazon. We're working really hard to get it on Barnes and Nobles. They've given us a lot of trouble, but you can get it from Amazon, or you can go to drtenpenny.com/0, and it will take you right there. But I think you'll like the book. It's interesting because I'm rereading the book now for these kinds of interviews and getting a lot of little factoids back in my head. And I'm going, ooh, that's really good. And then I sit there and laugh at myself going, it's your book, Sherri. I can't believe you just said that. So it's kind of funny.
Well, your work is truly amazing. I'm so very grateful. Carolyn, did you want to say something? I hope
Well, yeah, we know that there's an incentive for the pharmaceutical organizations and a lot of related businesses to make money from the vaccines and the countermeasures. But it seems like there's a larger agenda here. And you go into the whole goal of the Illuminati in your book about tearing apart our cultural things like religion and decreasing the ability of children to have critical thinking. Do you conclude that there's an agenda for reducing the population through this method?
I've been saying that since 2020, Carolyn.
Okay.
There's a very active depopulation agenda that they've said we've got too many people here. We can't have this, and you can't control a large population. And as we move into the robotic world and the transhumanism world, that we are on the Internet of Things and the Internet of Bodies and all that stuff. And if you've seen any of the videos of the new robots that they make, holy cow, you can't really tell if it's a human or not. And the advantage of having robots as an employee, I mean, think about it. They don't need vacation. They don't need benefits. They never mouth back to you. They don't have babies. They don't get sick. They can work 24/7 without a break. And if we have all of those people, and Elon Musk has said that by 2040, every human on the planet will have two robots as like assistants to do all the menial tasks that you don't need to do. And so, that moving into the electronic medical records and the surveillance and then our money, all the things that they're doing with our money, the central bank digital currencies that they can turn on and off that Catherine, so intelligently talks about all the time. It's all related. It's not separate buckets. All the things that they're doing to us with this vaccine agenda and wanting to make sure that every single human on the planet is injected with this technology, and the technology is going to be ramped up through 5G, and that's going to connect with our money. It's all one big global surveillance, and the fewer people that you have to do that to, the more likely you are to be successful.
And I know Catherine will be really sad that she wasn't here with you today, because
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of yours, as we all are. And so, Dr. Tenpenny, thank you so much for being on Financial Rebellion this week. We truly love you, and we're so grateful for everything that you do. So thank you so much for being here. And to our viewers, remember, tomorrow is our Simpsonwood Day, starting at 10 Eastern. So do tune in. The chat will be open all day. A lot of hard work gone into this, and I know that you're going to actually really find it very fascinating. And now we're going to go to our Gardasil story, our sad Gardasil story of the day. And we will keep telling these stories and keep going until something is done. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Tenpenny and Carolyn Betts.
Thank you so much for having me, Polly. It's been a pleasure.
Everybody's in love with this baby. You just need to know that she is now our poster baby. Yes, you are. You're the Prem poster baby. Yeah, she's so cute. We love her. The story's not about this beautiful little girl. The story's about you with your Gardasil injury. But we just have to say that as a first-time mother, you did your research, you gave birth at home, and you were just telling me that you feel that if you'd given birth in hospital and she'd had the vaccines, you didn't think she'd be here.
No. I think she would have died 100%.
She was so little.
Yeah. And, they try to force it on preemie babies even more, And she would have been in the NICU. She was perfectly healthy. She came out screaming. She was just small.
She was 4 pounds or something.
Mm-hmm.
Tiny, whiny.
Yes, so they would have kept her in the NICU for 4 weeks maybe and bankrupt us without even thinking twice about it.
So you didn't go to hospital at all?
No.
You stayed at home
I had
with
a
a 4-pound
midwife.
baby?
Mm-hmm. I had a midwife at home, and she checked her out, did everything that they would have in the hospital. She was perfectly healthy, and so we had no reason to go to the hospital. And she's been checked out since then, and she's absolutely perfect. No need for anything else, right, baby?
Your hand is absolutely tiny. This is tiny than a little doll's hand. It is the smallest hand I've seen in a long time. It's wincy. And look at all my wrinkled skin and this beautiful youthy skin. All right, let's hear about your Gardasil story. Very important that we want to. It was never really on our radar, this whole Gardasil thing. It was just MMR obsession with me.
Right.
And this whole tragedy of Gardasil is just being thrown in us. So we really want to hear your story. And I don't think you came here to tell that story, but we would love to hear it. Thank you.
So I guess I started giving it, it had first came out around the time that I was reaching 13, 14 years old. So my mom obviously jumped on it, we need to protect her. And so I got all 3 Gardasil vaccines. And then my freshman year in high school, I just slipped into a deep, deep depression and anxiety.
So you didn't actually feel ill after the vaccines, you just started to slowly slip into a depression?
It was very quick. I say slip, but it was quick. I just didn't want to get out of bed. I couldn't bring myself to go anywhere. 15 years old. You know what 15-year-old do you know that doesn't want to go to school and see their friends?
Play sport and do all that kind of stuff.
Right,
yeah.
right. So, I was a cheerleader at my high school and everything, and I stopped doing that. I had cheered for 12 years and stopped. And so my mom would get so angry, she would bang on my door and try to get me to go to school, and then I ended up being truant and just dropping out and getting my GED. And I haven't been... What?
What's a GED?
High school diploma. Got it. Kind of like a high school diploma. So, yeah, I hadn't had any real issues like that until then, and I didn't put it together until I got older and started researching vaccines that it was linked to that. I mean, it had to have been. I couldn't just slip into depression for no reason like
Right.
that.
And I'm just so pleased that you were able to have children, because we're hearing from so many.
I didn't think I could
subjects.
get pregnant. I seriously didn't. I didn't think that I could get pregnant. I had never had a scare, nothing. And, I mean, it happened, and I actually said, I don't think I can get pregnant, and I was 4 weeks pregnant with her, thank the Lord.
And you will never vaccinate? Or?
Never. I don't think it's necessary. These illnesses are not scary. Greater than 95% of the people who got the illness had no symptoms, or mild symptoms at that. And the less than 2% that had any detrimental issue afterwards, meaning death or paralysis, 50% of those people recovered fully. So I don't see how the illnesses are scarier than these vaccine injuries with all these parents' testimonies. It's not worth it to me.
What are you going to do if mandatory vaccines come in and they say you
I
have
will
no choice?
move. I mean, my family have guns, and we're strong people in that sense, and I won't let the government take my rights like that. I would rather die.
You and most of us. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. You may go, but you can't have your baby back.
Everyone wants to steal her.
Yeah, we've been looking for some fun on the bus. This is our new fun.
Yes.
Thank you so much, and I'm so glad that it's so lovely to see a premature baby so healthy. I love the whole story about how you gave birth at home. She was only 4 pounds, and you didn't go in the whole system. You stayed at home. You stayed strong, and look what you've got now, a beautiful baby.
God prevailed, 100%. I prayed that she would come out screaming, and she did.
How old are you? Do you mind me asking?
24.
You're very mature for a 24-year-old.
Thanks.
And I love the way you're thinking. You've got sharp little nails.
Yes.
She's strong. Realize this little bundle is strong. She's so cute. I love it when it heats up. Okay, so we have another story. I'm going to give this beautiful, what's she called?
Trinity Blair.
Trinity Blair is going to ride on the inside of the bus, and one day she will rule the country.
Yeah.
We don't need Hillary, we need Trinity Blair.
Yes.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Already started?
So cute. All right, so hi. Hello. This is an unvaccinated baby, everybody. So
In June of 2000, behind closed doors at a secluded retreat in Georgia, top scientists, government officials, and pharmaceutical executives met in secret. Their mission? To discuss alarming new data. Data that showed a strong correlation between mercury in vaccines and neurodevelopmental disorders. Officially titled Scientific Review of Vaccine Safety Data Link, this would later be dubbed the Simpsonwood Meeting. We came back to the scene. All we could find was rubble where the retreat and conference center once stood. What happened in this place was never meant for public ears. What happened next would change history. But before we can understand Simpsonwood, we have to go back 25 years. to the policies, the cover-ups, and the warning signs that set the stage.
Get a shot of protection, the swine flu shot.
It's in the best interest of all of our citizens.
Health Director ordered a stop to all swine flu shots.
And to grasp its full consequences, we must examine what has happened in the 25 years since.
It used to be 1 in 10,000, and now it's 1 in more than 250.
It is a perfect exponential curve.
Parents making decisions about their children's health deserve to have the best information available to them. You have studied vaccinated versus unvaccinated.
We have not studied vaccinated versus unvaccinated.
We're not sure what causes autism, but we know that vaccines do not.
Vaccines do not cause autism.
Vaccines do not cause autism.
There is no correlation. The dramatic rise in autism diagnoses, 1 in 31 children, up from 1 in 54 children back in 2016.
Scientific progress on this has been slow because scientists are frankly scared to ask the question.
Genes don't cause epidemics. You need an environmental toxin.
One day everyone will know the truth about vaccines.
Uncover the truth about what happened at Simpsonwood and how corruption in the pharmaceutical industry, along with collusion at the highest levels of public health, paved the way for the explosion of chronic health issues in our children. This is a must-watch event.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.